With us, our buddy Ali Velshi, the host of MSNBC's Velshi on weekend mornings. You can tweet him at Ali Velshi, ALIVELSHI. And Ali Program, I'm wondering your thoughts on Joe Biden yesterday, kind of throwing shade on Ron DeSantis, or maybe not, I don't know, saying, it's a fine thing that he has finally decided to accept climate change.
Yeah, it's a little bit of shade, and I'm actually surprised, Tom, because I've been covering hurricanes for 20 years, and I was down there for this one, and every time I talk about it, increasingly in recent years, I very deliberately bring up climate change, and we book segments on it, and we discuss it. And we discuss the real ways in which these hurricanes are exacerbated by climate change, by wind changes, by warmer water, by higher water levels. I mean, that's just all plain science. And then the larger issues around climate change and where people live and why poor people live in places that are more susceptible to it. And I still get pushback, right? It's like when after a mass shooting, when you talked about gun control, people would say, this isn't the time to talk about it. I used to think it's exactly the time to talk about it, right? This is when it's central, it's in the news. And I feel the same way about hurricanes. I'm always fascinated, and even in 2022, at the degree of pushback that people provide in terms of not, this isn't that, and don't talk about that, and this is a human disaster, and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that Ron DeSantis finds himself increasingly as a guy who's trying to be a Donald Trump redux in a difficult position on this one, because he's got a lot of people, including at a network across the road from me, who really just don't want to have this discussion around climate change and don't want to realize the reality of it. But if we don't realize the reality of it, we don't do the protective things that we need to do. We don't build properly. We don't relocate people properly. In the case of Lee County, Florida, which is where Fort Myers is, we didn't move the people out who needed help being moved out. So now we have 100 people dead at least. This could actually be one of the most deadly storms in Florida history. So I really am puzzled by the disconnect between the discussions about climate change and hurricanes. I understand hurricanes have been going on for millions of years. They will go on, and they would have gone on regardless of climate change. But the intensity, the danger, and the flooding, which is what killed most of these people, is exacerbated by climate change. End of story. It's not even a debatable matter.
Well, let me simplify it for you. There is only one political party in the world, or at least in the developed world, that continues to deny climate change. That's the Republican Party in the United States. And the Republican Party in the United States has much of the political power that it has right now as a consequence of billions of dollars that have been spent over the last 40 or 50 years by billionaires who made their money on fossil fuels. Not just the Koch brothers, but
Yep, you're absolutely right.
And the Republicans know who's buttering their bread. They know where the money is coming from, and they don't want it to stop. And and these fossil fuel billionaires, they want to continue to poison the planet and make more money.
And I don't get how it gets so far beyond that, though. I mean, I had several conversations about this on TV last week, including one with Joy Reid, which sort of connected the idea of climate with refugees, right? With migrants. Yeah. And climate will soon be the single biggest reason why people move around the world. And even with the refugees from North Africa a few years back, a lot of that is climate. They come from places that are drought.
This is what we're getting right now from Guatemala. We're getting subsistence farmers who've been driven off their farms by climate change.
Totally right. Now, are there other issues? Absolutely. But climate is central. And so we were having this conversation, and I had to write this down because I was so fascinated by it. I was in the middle of a storm. I couldn't hear it when it was said live. But Tucker Carlson had a bit of a meltdown around this and said, quote, imagine taking a science lecture from someone as stupid as Stephanie Ruhle or Ali Velshi. On that point, it's ridiculous. It's unseemly and anti-human. People are dying. So wait just a moment before putting forward your demands for more political power.
Spoken like Charlton Heston, right? Or Wayne LaPierre.
The reason I care about climate change in the instance of a hurricane is the same reason I care about gun control in the instance of a mass shooting. If you did X, Y might not have happened, or Y might have had a different result, right? It's a direct correlation. Yeah. As we have said, this was a big hurricane, 150 miles per hour winds. That's a serious hurricane. But most people died of flooding. Most people died from storm surge because we measure hurricanes by wind, and we don't often think about, we don't have a measurement for the flooding part. Flooding happens in places that are prone to flooding. and much of Florida is prone to flooding. And when I was around, we talk about Sanibel Island a lot. Everybody was always talking about where's Sanibel Island, what's happened on Sanibel Island, where are the people, who left, who's there. Let's take a look at the video of the damage. People I saw weren't in Sanibel Island. They were shrimp fishermen, who, by the way, are at the low end of the income scale for anybody who fishes for a living. They had lost their boats, they had lost their IDs, they had lost their money, they had lost their sleeping quarters. They had no help. I remember asking one guy, I said, at least are the boats insured? And he said, absolutely not. He said, price of gas is up, price of shrimp is low. If I make $25,000 a year, that would be a great year for me. And he said, I don't mind that we need to help the people in Sanibel Island too, but nobody knows that we are even here. They didn't have toilets, they didn't have food, they didn't have power for their cell phones, they didn't know where to go. They were a mile from help, but they couldn't get it. And that's the kind of reason those people are subject to all this BS that you and I are talking about, all this nonsense about how it's not climate change. Climate change involves realizing people, particularly poor people, live in areas that are prone to this sort of destruction. So we need to think about them. When we talk about climate justice, it's not an abstraction. It's the idea that there are people who are disproportionately affected by climate change. Until you actually start talking about climate change properly, we're not going to get to the part about people disproportionately affected by it. And we need to get there now, because many of those are the people who died.